Hello, delightful makers. In this video, I want to talk to you about the differences between collage and raw edge applique. So they are similar in some instances. They actually are both raw edge applique. And raw edge applique is when you cut out your shapes and you just leave the edges raw. They're just, the cut edges are what is visible on the front of your project, versus turned applique where you fold the edges, and instead of seeing the raw or the cut edge of the fabric, it's actually a fold in the fabric. So that is what raw edge applique is. And it is one of my favorite methods of applique just because it is really simple. Now, when I talk about my patterns or I do a tutorial with raw edge applique, I am typically referring to this type of applique. So raw edge applique is when you cut out your shapes from templates, you place them onto your background fabric, and because it has a raw edge, you want to stitch around every single shape. So you can see all of my stitches around. Here I did a fun star stitch on the star, but you can see I have stitched around every shape. So when you have complex shapes like these larkspurs, they can be kind of difficult and kind of a pain to stitch all the way around. But that is what is necessary in order to hold down the fabric. Typically when I do raw edge applique, I use FlexiFuse. So it might be a little hard to see, but FlexiFuse is my favorite fusible. I buy it by the roll because I do so much raw edge applique, but it also comes in sheets. A pattern for raw edge applique may look something like this, where you have all of your shapes separated and then you have to trace them, cut them out, and then you place them where they go. Usually they will come with a placement guide so that you can see where to place them. Sometimes the placement guide is really large and that's what you are tracing your shapes from. And then sometimes it is something a little smaller that just kind of gives you an idea. With my patterns, especially with these birthday bouquets, I like for the makers to be able to decide more of how their flowers are going to be. So this is my suggested placement guide, but if they want to trace more flowers or not put the star on, then they have those options because of the way that I have given them the templates. So that is raw edge applique. You're typically tracing out your templates using a fusible that is lightweight and is easily sewn through. So you want something you can sew through really easily. And you have to stitch around every single shape. Now, collage is different in the sense that when you are making the project, your pattern is not a series of templates that you cut out and then put into place. Your pattern is often the full image. So for the dragon, this is the pattern. You get the full image. And for more complex collage projects, it may have lines in here to create dimension of the wings, lines in here to create dimension all along the body, and you use those and you cut along those lines to create the beautiful like mosaic within the collage. Now with a more simple pattern, I use my fabric to help create that dimension. With collage, I use Steam-A-Seam 2, and Steam-A-Seam 2 is permanent, which means I do not stitch around every single little piece. So I can have really small pieces like his eyes and his nostrils, and I don't have to stitch around all those little pieces because once I add steam, With the Steam-A-Seam 2, this becomes permanent, and I just have to stitch across each one just to give it a fun quilt look. Typically with Collage, you aren't using these for quilts that you will put on your bed or snuggle with. Typically Collage quilts are more art quilts, and they are going on the wall. So having those raw edges not stitched down don't really become a problem with fraying, because you're not washing this over and over and over. But I will tell you that I have taken my collages with Steam-A-Seam 2 and put them on sweatshirts and washed them multiple times, and they don't fray at all. They stay really, really nice. So that's kind of a fun thing with Collage, is you can utilize that permanence of the Steam-A-Seam 2 and put it on almost anything. Another thing with Collage, instead of using just templates to create my image, I also use the fabric to help create my image. So for example, like here, I cut out these shapes from the fabric to add some fun details. I cut the shape here to add some fun details. Even here in the body, I followed the lines of those leaves to create some detail in the body. So it's not just based on the templates that are provided, it's based on using the templates and working with your fabric. So you end up with a really unique project that every single one looks a little bit different. Even when you have kits, everybody's collage looks a little bit different. So that's the difference between Collage and raw edge applique. Raw edge applique uses a fusible that you can sew through easily, and you have to stitch around every single piece of fabric, and you use your templates to create your image. Collage, you use a permanent fusible like Steam-A-Seam 2. You do not have to stitch around every single piece of fabric, and you use a combination of the pattern and your fabric to create your image. I hope that kind of gives you an idea of the difference between the two. They do have a lot of similarities, but they are also very, very different in the execution and how you put them together. So I hope that this has inspired you. Now it's your turn. Go make something beautiful.